any more questions, any burning questions, a question that maybe you've already posted that you don't feel has been answered yet? Any new questions? Any observations or comments or great ideas that you'd like to share?
Firstly, thank you very much for your presentation and for coming across the world to do it. Would you be able to give to us an example of child to child or adult to adult with regard to the restorative practices? An example, please?
Example in what sense? Just a case example, or just the way those things would work? I mean, in terms of restorative practices per se, the general restorative practices, there should be very few meetings that take place in Leeds now where the restorative principles aren't adopted, in terms of making sure a conversation between child, young person, family and professionals would be run along restorative lines, so that everybody would get a voice, everybody would be listened to. They may use a talking piece to make sure that conversation takes place. And it's used in all sorts of cases. Predominantly it's most effective at the moment is in family group decision making, where families are coming together to come up with their own plans for the response to child welfare concerns of children. You saw the example in the schools where it's being used, not in all schools, but in more and more schools now, to resolve problems early on, or to be used in a sort of coaching, mentoring methodology that supports educational attainment. So it's used in those terms as well. We use it heavily in restorative justice terms, so in the youth offending world, which is its original origins, it's been used there quite a lot of time as well. In fact, we're working with West Yorkshire Police now on the basis that if we're going to be a child-friendly city, that it can't be right that if children and young people are arrested by the police, that they are taken into adult detention. So they still go into police custody and they're held in adult police cells. Even if they don't end up being locked up ultimately, they can spend a night there in a police cell. So they go through quite a brutal adult-orientated process. So our argument is that we want to get to a position where no child or young person arrested by the police would be taken anywhere near a police station. We'd take them to somewhere else, probably a designated house, home, where we'd set about trying to have some restorative conversations to try and resolve that conflict. That might involve bringing the victim in, it might involve bringing family in, well probably would definitely involve bringing family in to try and resolve conflict. In those cases where things are really serious, and we have had some horrible cases, including a dreadful case of the murder of a teacher in a classroom, then in those cases you still wouldn't take that young person to police custody, but you might take them into what we would term secure accommodation, which is a more humane way, but it's still under lock and key. So why can't we do that? And we're talking to government about, so it's an extension of our use of restorative practice into those territories. We've used it in our complaints procedures, completely rethought our complaints procedures, so wherever possible, if it's internal complaints and grievances between staff or whatever, a restorative process will be used, adult to adult, and facilitated to try and come up with a more constructive response to that. But also if it's children, young people or families complaining about the services, we try and negotiate a face-to-face conversation, a restorative conversation to understand why people are cross with us, why things have not gone well, and see if we can come up and resolve things on that basis. Does that give you a reasonable flavour? Okay, thank you. Hi.
Thank you. We're talking about how important the child's voice is and the young person's voice. One thing that we had a discussion here was, how do you capture those kids that are really disadvantaged? Because quite often when we do engagement with young people or kids, it's the kids that are in a good place that quite often will provide the feedback when really you want to hear from the kids that aren't.
So the strategy there is, because it's something we expect of every interaction we have with children and young people, then you by definition you start to catch that. So it's not, we did have that conversation very early on about consulting with and listening to the usual suspects, if I can use those terms. And actually, the usual suspects themselves, the children and young people, were sick of being asked. So they'd had enough of it as well. So there's a whole variety of ways. There's a wonderful woman called Hannah who runs the Voice and Influence team, which is only 2 or 3 people, as I said earlier on. And they've got a shed full of creative ideas that they've come up with from in conversations with children and young people themselves, and to get at those different groups, and actually using young people themselves to talk to other young people. So it's you have sort of ambassadors who will go and facilitate a set of conversations that certain groups of young people wouldn't entertain sitting down and talking to us about, but they will in a different way. We've been doing some really interesting work with, there's a poet you may know called Lem Cisse, who was a young person who was in care himself. He's been a great ambassador for Child Friendly Leeds, and he's been working with us, and he's doing some stuff particularly with young people in care, and in that phrase, hard to reach once they've left care, or they've been in care and left and gone somewhere else. So there's just a whole variety, but the principle should be that young person, however hard to reach, will be connected to somebody somewhere. And it might not be a traditional route between, a particular agency, but it might be, somebody else. And that sort of and so going via them to get at their voice, because the principle is we want their feedback. We want the feedback. Just give you another quick example on that. That's how that works. Remember we talked earlier on about the Top 100 program, where you get the 100, and then you have a conversation about who's going to do what. So the conversation might go like, well, okay, we don't know where that child is, but there's no use me as a social worker going and knocking on the door because they won't let me in. They don't like me. Well, actually, somebody else might then say, yeah, but his elder brother plays basketball. That basketball club is run by the police officer, Fred, down the road, and they love Fred. So maybe if we get hold of Fred then, talk to Fred about why we're worried about this little boy, could he get us an in to the family and start a different set of conversations? Think about what I said about Victoria and Nurse Torb. There's a different way. If you think about the context, there's usually a different way round. That's not the traditional route in. Because you're all under that common purpose of importance of voice and influence, the 5 outcomes that bind you together, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Okay? Right, I just wanted to say a couple of things by way of close. So thanks for your attention, thanks for your contributions, thanks for your work, thanks for what you do day in, day out to improve the life chances of the children in South Australia, and keep at it, please. I want to say a couple of things, three chunks of things. I'm going to say something, then I'm going to show you a film, and then just some closing remarks, and then I'm going to hand over to Sandra and Graham, I think. Is that right? Hey, it all worked then. Do you see that? Perfect. The first thing, I've whittled on quite a lot about outcomes, and this idea of conditions of well-being for all children within a given area. And I can't stress enough how important that was for us. And the plan on the page that you've got, which actually I was reminded, the chair reminded me to mention one thing. The copy you've got on your tables, you've got the one change in that plan that we've changed in 6 years. And it's the number 12 changed to 14. Okay? And that was because the feedback we got, particularly the feedback from young people themselves, was we weren't doing enough around social, emotional, mental health issues. And we've put that in to the mix now. So that's become, think about that. That's the only change in 6 years in terms of getting momentum and focus and not reinventing the wheel every 2 minutes. But the outcomes at the top, the 5 outcomes, however you get there, however you get the conversation generated across the state, I just urge you to focus on trying to get your 5 or 6 or 7 or 3 or whatever it is, but something that gives you that common purpose in terms of moving forwards. And the reason why I think outcomes are so important, and a colleague of mine called Mike Pinnock came up with a list, a sort of top 10 list, and I'll just share it with you. Outcomes bring clarity and consistency of purpose. Outcomes describe the difference we want to make. Outcomes demand a common language and common meaning. Outcome-orientated ideas work best in outcome-orientated cultures. So it forces you to change the culture of the organisation that you're in. Only partnerships can improve outcomes. Outcomes provide a starting place for understanding progress. How much did we do? How well did we do it? How well did we do it? Is anybody any better off? Outcome data can tell powerful stories. Outcomes are not commodities. One of the words I hate to see, if I can confess here now, is when people talk about delivering child welfare services. We're delivering children's services. You deliver pizza. You don't deliver things that impact on the human condition. So just think about that. Outcomes are not commodities. Outcomes hold our plans together. They give that sense of purpose, the glue that keeps things together. And the most important, outcomes help keep us sane. Very important. Okay? That's why outcomes matter. Conversations matter. Relationships matter. I've said that throughout the conversation that we've had today. And relationships are really, really important. And I'm going to show you a short film now, and this is another beautiful moment where, when I was in Hull, we'd commissioned a film company to come and do a piece of work with us to talk about, we were trying to explore this idea of Hull as the world's first restorative city, and trying to spread restorative practice across the entire city. And they came and did a little bit of a film for us, and we had some spare time with the filmmakers. And we asked a group of young people from Endeavour High School at the time, said, do you want to borrow the camera and the film crew, and do you want to go and make a film? So they went and they made a film about relationships and connections, and it's called Flowers.
It's just to put a smile on your face.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So there you go, a whole film about connections and relationships with hardly any words. So just think about that, and think about, you see the first follower? See the first follower? Got a round of applause, didn't he? So, last thing I want to say is a big thank you for your time. Thank you for putting up with my croaky voice, and thank you for whoever keeps providing me with hot lemon and all the drugs and things. Much appreciated. Final thing I want to say about why your work matters, and I want to go back to, I just want to tell you one other little bit of a story. Well, in fact, I'm going to tell you two stories about Victoria. And one's because I got into a conversation a moment ago with somebody about organisational culture. And if you think about the Victoria Climbié case, it hit national headlines, there was a massive public inquiry, there was huge scrutiny on a number of individuals involved in the case. But the most scrutiny fell on a young social worker called Lisa Arthurworry. Even though she wasn't the only social worker, because Victoria went between various social work departments, but Lisa was the one who copped for it, to put it crudely. And it just begs the question, which is worth thinking about. Why would a young, enthusiastic, newly qualified social worker like Lisa accept such low professional standards? And I won't go through all the details of what I mean by that, but you can tell by the nature of the case something went wrong, badly wrong. Why would she do that? Why would she do that? And it wasn't because she was a bad person or wanting to be a bad social worker. It was because of the organisational culture she was dropped into. This is how we do things around here. You don't have to go and visit. Don't bother writing that up now. Never mind. Just do this. Just fill it in like that. This is what we do. So organisational culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Really, really important. Second thing I'd say to close. I talked earlier on about Victoria's time in the second hospital when she was at her happiest, but there was that lack of pursuit of context at the end to just finally get the information that everybody would have been waiting for and would have led to a different outcome for Victoria. When she went into the first hospital visit and she arrived in hospital and she was admitted into the hospital, this is where she was diagnosed with scabies. And I think I alluded to earlier on, there's some dispute as to whether or not she actually had scabies. But what we know is she wasn't very well. And she had a number of unexplained marks on her body, and she had a number of bruises and cuts and various things. And they took them in, and the child welfare agencies kicked in. The safeguarding procedures kicked in. Social workers spoke to police spoke to health professionals. Things started to happen. But what nobody did was ask a fundamental question: how did Victoria get there? How did she get to hospital? And if I tell you that Victoria turned up at that hospital on the first occasion in the arms of an unregistered childminder, what does that tell you? What does it take to be so concerned about the welfare of somebody else's child that you pick them up and take them to a local hospital? And what story would they have told if somebody had asked that question, how did Victoria arrive at hospital, and spoken to the unregistered childminder and listened to their story about why they were so concerned about Victoria? Would outcomes for Victoria have been different? I would argue, Lord Laming would argue, potentially yes. That's why what you do matters. That's why the context that you work in matters. That's why looking at things through the eyes of the child matters. Listening to the voice of the child, listening to the voice of family, and understanding what family means to children is so important. Thanks for listening. I wish you all the very best.